Okay, welcome everybody. This is a really important session, so I'm guessing more people will show up. If not, they'll probably do less well on the exam than those of you who are here. Although I will, of course, as always, this session is an important one, so I will post it before 8 p.m. and maybe even by Thursday night. Probably I'll try to do that Thursday before 10 p.m. or so when I, have a chance to tear away myself away from other tasks, including grading late papers and so forth. So it'll certainly be there before the week. However, on this one, you have a chance to. Let's let Drew in. Welcome. Yeah, we just got started. The important task there too tonight. One is to finish the must-know list of slides, and then we'll take a break, and then we're going to do reducing, or I call it the reduction exercise, where we reduce by 40%. I put it in writing at the start of the syllabus on the first page. I always do that so my students can count on that and hold me to it if I've never not done that. 40%, that's a significant chunk of the entire list for the second half, since the midterm of must-know slides that we've covered will be removed from the study list. And then about a third of the terms to know from the list of terms to know, because there aren't as many terms, of course, anywhere near as many of those as there are of slides from the syllabus. So we'll do all of that after the break. And I don't know, we might still end a little early, but I'm guessing with the kind of questions, and I need to give you detailed reminder. Really, it's the same, just in a nutshell, the test is exactly the same format, same link, same number of slides, same point total, 100 plus an extra 5-point optional extra credit slide. So that means, at least if you recall how you studied for your midterm, you should do the same for the final. But I'll go over that in great detail and email everyone as well. All my class, I do that at least a few days before the test starts. So by probably Friday, I'll email people with reminding you of what the requirements are, but also the test sheet itself, I will email over the weekend. And I won't wait till Sunday, because Sunday is going to be a very busy day for me. I'm leading a walking tour. I haven't done it in 3 years. It's one of my favorite activities, and it's a unique opportunity for two reasons. One is 20 points of extra credit just for showing up and attending. You don't have to write or say or ask or do anything. But 20 points if you log in, or sign in is a better word, is actual real time, not online activity, but with physically with my assistant, who will be there. I pay, of course, to do this, and the fee is $20. It's nominal, but it's a lot of work. It's a few weeks worth to get us into 4 different buildings that are national historic landmarks. They're all over 100 years old, and they're very, here we go with, hang on. Let's see, there it goes. Okay, when it goes off the screen, I assume it says unstable connection, but it's not, because my laptop's not connected. Okay, back to finishing up that point. The point is, I sent everyone an email this morning. Well, I think late morning, telling you about it as a reminder. And the deadline, I might extend it through Saturday, because some people don't know till the last minute. But you can bring a guest, and they would be, not getting the 20 points extra credit. They would just be enjoying going inside 4 buildings, and they're not open to the public, that I have good contacts with the owners of. But I need some kind of head count. That's why it'd be best, if you think you're going to go, if you could decide by even, say, before 10 p.m. or maybe even midnight on Friday. I'll send one more reminder. Then you could still come, and possibly Saturday. But that's this Sunday, the 22nd, from 2 to 4:30. I won't repeat all the details. It's in Berkeley, and I'll have the starting point and everything. It's actually in the email I sent, which most of you were probably busy, didn't see. So you can check that whenever you look at your cubbies. I hate that phrase. It's like we're in middle school or something. Your student email inboxes, along with later this week a reminder of the requirements for the final. And eventually, of course, an attachment, a PDF for you to print out or download of the actual test itself, like we did for the midterm. Okay, so are there any questions at this point about either extra credit or let me see, I always try to end with yeah. Okay, that's probably because of the connection. That's frustrating. It doesn't say, can you guys hear me okay now? Let Clarissa in here. Is it better now?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Well, also I can speak up and enunciate as well. I try to all the time, but if I make an extra effort, it just sometimes it will do that. I know, depending on which end you're on and what's happening where you are. But okay, let's proceed. I like to remind people if they haven't yet turned in either one or both papers, the deadline is rapidly approaching. It's the end of this week. Basically, it's Friday, but I'll extend it to Saturday. But that's the cutoff because that's the end of final exams. Sorry, that's the end of the work week or whatever you want to call it, the school week before final exams. And that's in every class I've ever taught, whether it was in person or online for 25 years now. I have to have a cutoff. Otherwise, I'll be getting late papers after the test. I don't have time because we have like 4 days to do all the grading of all the turn the grades in. And I've never missed a deadline. So speaking of which, the timing is good for people to know. Let's see. Hopefully Clarissa is able to join us. Looks like it might be. Yeah, the connections may be a little dicey, I guess, where some of you, okay, Samuel, good timing. All right, you guys.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yes, that's what we're here for. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm Jessica. I just want to know if you get my paper.
Oh, yeah.
I just got an
Oh,
access
absolutely.
link to my Gmail account. And
I sent you a detailed email. I didn't see it until today, but
okay.
I also saw your extra credit. But this is for everybody. Two things. Yes, I got both your papers. Now, when they'll be graded, I can't promise exactly what day, probably by the weekend. And in any case, you should have the point totals no later than Monday before you log on of what your points are. And that's for everybody except extra credit. But in your case, actually, about extra credit, that was fantastically detailed, a very thorough set of extra credits options you sent in, but the maximum is 60 points. So I already added up 60 points, and that's true for everybody. So you got an email, you'll see, confirming my having received the papers and that they were openable, and second, that I got all your extra credit. But speaking of which, nobody else besides you, no, right? Jessica has gotten 60 points extra credit. A couple people have gotten 25 or 30. So you still have plenty of options. Okay, but I also still don't have a second paper from Cara. In fact, at the moment, I don't see one from either first or second from Cara Bolton or Anthony DeLucci. Now, that's not a disaster because you don't have more points off after this. Actually, that's not, Emma Hackathorn. I sent an email to some people, but if I did this, I'd do nothing else but follow up. I'm trying to get it all in one session. And then there's two more, Sam Huey and Matilda Mayes. Those are people I definitely didn't get a second paper from, and at least two of them I didn't get a first or second paper. Now, you can still turn them in, but don't wait till Friday to start working on them. Here we go again, unstable connection. Hang on. Let's let it hopefully settle. I'm talking about the Zoom connection or internet connection. Okay, now can people hear me? Yes, I hope. Uh-oh. I need someone to confirm if you guys can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, good. Because it could obviously be a very difficult scenario for you if you couldn't hear anything I'm about to say for the last few must-know slides or the review after the midterm. After the break. All right. So the people, I only do this as a kind of a prompt, or what do you want to say, encouraging thing. That it's still choppy. Well, one thing I can guarantee you is that the review session after, let's hope everything's settled down well before, after the break, I'll go ahead and do an extra step, and that's hold up each page of the syllabus once we've done the review, so that people can see on their screens which slides were removed. Okay, that should definitely help. Let's hope, though, there's silly connection problems that just fade, disappear by the time we get to the first slide. We still have a couple more quick announcements. So again, some people just joined us, but if you didn't hear, if you know you, in other words, if you're someone you know who you are, of course, you should know, oh, I haven't yet done my second paper, or maybe I somehow didn't do either. You got to get busy and get them in. And sooner the better, because you'll get your grades back sooner and your point totals that way, minus any extra credit. Now, the extra credit options, all of them, any extra credit option, I will continue accepting as late as Saturday of Memorial Day weekend. And then I do want to kick back and relax on that weekend. So that's the cutoff. You'll get an email reminding you. So it's possible for you to take the exam and then go ahead and say, oh, I don't know if I did very well, or I'd rather know I got some margin, a cushion, whatever, for points. And I still can do extra credit even up until the Saturday after this exam. That's the last day of final exams week. That's the cutoff for all my classes, for all extra credit. Late papers, the cutoff is this Friday. So please try to get them in so that I can start, getting them logged in and graded, and I'll confirm that I got them, even if you don't ask me to, as a courtesy, because it's really important. We're down to the wire, obviously. Okay, so any questions now about late papers? Or the exam, we're going to do that whole part of it after the break, right? Is to, how the test is going to be, of course, same thing as the midterm, but just to remind you, the procedure for it, the requirements for it, and the review of reducing the list of slides and terms, all of which will be done in the second half tonight. But before, other than on the final, before we proceed, does anybody have any urgent question they would like me to address? Anybody? For now. Okay, and again, I'll stick around at the end. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the screen share. And I'll be honest with you, I have two classes that overlap so much in terms of the material that is covered from the syllabus, and you guys started later. This class started later, so it's just sort of like catching up. I don't remember for sure whether or not, I think we covered this, didn't we? The last session, Salisbury Cathedral.
Yes.
Yeah, we did that. That was the last thing we did.
Right, that's what I thought. And therefore, I don't think we did this, which would be the next one, Chapel of Henry VII. We didn't cover this, right? Okay, correct?
No, we didn't.
Good, there we go. Okay, so we'll be in good shape because we have, just 6 slides, and I may even cut one of the one. I just do that when we do the review. All right, so let's get straight to this. The first must-know slide of the remaining set of 6 slides from the syllabus. All right, this is the Chapel of Henry VII. Now, if you wrote the number 7 with a TH, 7th, or the letter 7th, I think I'd go ahead and accept it and tell the readers to, if they're grading your final. So it's best, though, to do it the way it is on the syllabus, and it'll be right in front of you. So it's the Roman numerals. Everyone should know Roman numerals from art history, at least classes in history class. Henry VII, VII, is how the Romans would write it. He was the father of, obviously, Henry VIII. The location, London, and the date is 1516. So this is a small chapel added to the back of Westminster Abbey. That's the first fact. It's a small royal chapel done by and for the royal family. They didn't do it themselves. Obviously, they hired the workers, but it was their, order to build this on the back of Westminster, just like it sounds, capital W, of course, Westminster Abbey, the most famous church one of the two most famous in all of Britain, the other one being St. Paul's, that was in the movie Mary Poppins. So this is the back end of one of the two main cathedrals in London, Westminster Abbey. And it was built by and for the royal family of Henry VII. And here's the other part, the next fact about the maze, there's several facts, that it's been used ever since it was finished by the royal family for various important public events. Sometimes weddings. More often they do them at St. Paul's because it's much bigger, but they've had weddings here. And sometimes funerals. And Diana, you remember, some of you know who she was, right? When she had that tragic death. When she died, her funeral service was held here. And it was broadcast around the world. Something like 2 billion people watched it from this room. So it's used for various royal ceremonies, religious ceremonies, such as weddings and funerals, etc. Okay, but that doesn't tell us too much about the building itself. The building is our last new term for this semester. Well, no, I misspoke. There are two. There's this and one other that'll come up with the last painting you'll see tonight before the break. Okay, so this second from the bottom, in other words, of your list of terms to know, is this term, perpendicular style. Okay, so that is a style of late medieval architecture in Great Britain. You could just say Britain if you prefer, but officially it's Great Britain, right? A style of late medieval architecture in Great Britain, comma, which used perpendicular ornament along the walls, which used perpendicular ornaments, I should say plural ornaments, along the walls of both the interior and exterior. So, but we're just looking at the interior. It's more visible in the interior. I'll say it again. It's the style of late medieval architecture in Great Britain, which used perpendicular ornaments along the walls, both interior and exterior. It was used for buildings, not just churches, but that's the most common use. It was first used for churches, and that's what this is. Obviously, it's a chapel with choir stalls. If that's not obvious, maybe you should write that. These are choir stalls where young boys who are chosen by the king, well, I don't personally, but anyway, for that job to sing during religious ceremonies. These, if you're curious, flags, they're new versions. Obviously they're not medieval or 500 years old, but these are flags of the different noble families that back the winning side. That's why this was built. That's a really important fact. This was built by Henry VII to give thanks to God. That's what he said, to give thanks to God for having him win that war, the war between the Tudors. He was obviously a Tudor, and if it's not obvious again, or you didn't know this, you should add this. Who was Henry VII? Well, not just father of Henry VIII, the most monstrous king that ever ruled England. He was totally different than his son. He won a civil war, a 30-year, can you imagine, 30-year long civil war. He won it and founded the Tudor dynasty. So that's a really important fact. Obviously, it changed the history of Britain and Europe, and by extension, the world. That's what helped create, Britain as a colonial power and all that other stuff that went with that, good and bad. So again, Tudor.
Could you perchance repeat
Yes.
The last fact? Because it was kind of cutting out.
Sure, of course. Yes. That Henry VII won a civil war, a 30-year long civil war, and then founded the Tudor dynasty. I think everyone knows how to spell that, but Tudor. Everyone's seen that word, I assume. The most famous rulers of British history were Tudors: Elizabeth I, Henry VIII. Well, this guy was the founder of the Tudor dynasty, and he built a chapel to thank God for that. That he felt God had helped him win that civil war. So that's almost the entire set of facts, except remember, always with architecture, especially, the style of a work of art, and in particular of a building, is part of the meaning. So why would we call this chapel perpendicular style? What should be pretty obvious after looking at the slide for several minutes. All the ornament is perpendicular. It's all, vertical. You could say vertical, but they didn't say that word. They used the word perpendicular, meaning the ornaments all, right, are parallel vertical lines is another way of saying it, but that's so complicated. You could just shorten it to, obviously perpendicular. And that's true for the windows themselves, the framing around them, right? The wall carvings, right? And even the choir stalls are perpendicular style. You see how tall and narrow everything is, all the decorations, the wood and stone, decorations all throughout the entire interior of this room are all perpendicular style. Okay, that's plenty on the meaning here. So let's do a formal analysis. Well, it's hard to tell when you look at a picture, it's only half of a room, but it is completely symmetrical, totally balanced. The roof or ceiling, you can say the ceiling and the floor are the same width. So it is balanced left to right and top to bottom completely. It's full of the rhythm of the windows, right? With the perpendicular ornament, by definition, that style is going to have a lot of rhythm. All these repeated lines here, right? And the choir stalls create rhythm. So the windows, the carved stonework on the walls, the choir stalls, all of that creates rhythm. It is by definition more stable than dynamic, because perpendicular lines are straight, of course. So this entire room is mostly stable, but the tops of the doors, the openings, you can say the doorways, right? There's a pointed arch, so that's dynamic. And the ceiling, you can't see it, but it's quite ornate. The ceiling is peaked, obviously a cathedral type ceiling. So that's dynamic, but almost everything else in the room is stable. The textures are the real textures. There's no similar textures. Real smooth texture of glass, of course. Real rough texture of stone. So 4 textures. Real smooth texture of tile on the floor. And real rough texture of wood. These, if it's not obvious, the choir stalls are carved wood. So there's your 4 real textures. The colors are a mixture of warm and cool. More cool than warm, though. The floor, definitely. Blue and white tile, that's cool. And then, of course, the windows with the slight blue tinting and the stone, the gray stone. But the lower walls are yellow stone. And so that's obviously warm. And then the choir stalls, wood is always warm color, dark brown. The modeling is just shadows from the sun. Yeah, I would say you could break it down into perhaps the 3 main masses. The main wall, or the back wall, actually, that's the back end of this, but it's not really, because you enter through. It's hard to explain, forget it. I've been there 3 times. It's spectacular, and tour groups are always parading through here. So just say the entrance, or you can say the back wall where the entrance is the largest mass. And then both the floor and the ceiling are the second largest masses, right? Because they're the same exact width and length. And then the third largest would be the choir stalls. The lines are both visual on the windows and doors, like they always would be, right, in every building. But there are carved lines in the stone and on the choir stalls, carved lines. Okay, I think I've covered everything. Color, texture, modeling. Okay, don't think I've got anything. Yeah, all right. So now we are going to look at something that you can take a break from taking notes for the next slide, this slide and one other. But this one is a painting. You don't have to know this, but just to give you context for the next must know, it's coming up in 2 slides. This is a painting done in Holland of the Pilgrim Church. Now, you don't have to know any of this, but some of you already know the Pilgrims, they never built cathedrals. That's obviously a cathedral. It's a Gothic cathedral. They hated ornament and decoration. They dressed in black. You know this about Pilgrims. And then they burned people, mostly young women, or hung them if they thought they were witches because they danced too much. Yeah, the Pilgrims were not a very lively bunch. And so what would they be doing inside a Gothic cathedral in Holland? Well, that's part of the origin of one part of the US, the Massachusetts colony, right? The second oldest colony. They lived in Holland for over 20 years because they were exiled from England, because they were so radically against everything, that anyone wants to enjoy in life. So they were asked to leave England. They went to Holland, and they actually started to raise their kids there, but they didn't like it. It was too ornate. That is Amsterdam. You ever been to Amsterdam? If you don't ever go there, just you've seen movies. It's one of the most beautifully decorated cities. All the buildings are, the canals. I mean, it wasn't a happy home for them, but they were allowed there because these people were Protestant. So they were allowed to stay in Amsterdam in one neighborhood. And they went to this church. Wasn't their church, but that's the nickname it got from the historians in Amsterdam. It's a national landmark, and it's open to the public as a museum plus a functioning cathedral. So the point is, the Pilgrims left Holland because they were being forced to go to churches and fancy buildings like this, and their children were learning Dutch, not English. So that's when they moved across the Atlantic to what later became the colony of Massachusetts. But in the meantime, this is the next must know. It's down near the bottom of the list. St. Luke's Church in Virginia. St. Luke, second from the bottom. Saint, right? Luke's Church, Lukes, of course. Virginia, everybody knows how to spell it. State of Virginia, 1632. So this is a remarkable building. There's nothing else like it on this continent. Literally, it is an English Gothic country church in the United States. It's the oldest and the only, it's the oldest church building intact, I should say, intact church building. So these are the facts you should have, so I will say it slowly. This is the oldest intact colonial church building of any English speaking colony. There are older Spanish missions in the US, New Mexico and places, but on the East Coast where the English colonies were, I'll say it again, it is the oldest intact church from any of the English speaking colonies. 1632, men were still wearing armor and fighting on horseback and having jousting tournaments in Europe. Well, not so much in Italy. They'd gotten past that. They were all well into the Renaissance. But this was when England was still in the late medieval phase of their culture. And they still tried people as witches, mostly women. And they believed in, superstitious things. And they wore armor into battle. So and their architecture was still Gothic. That changed soon after this was built. So this church is an authentic Gothic, not revival. That's the style you see like at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York on Fifth Avenue. It's in almost every rom-com ever filmed. And there's a scene at the church there, maybe Sex and the City. That's a Gothic revival building from the 1800s. This is not a revival. This is a church designed in the style that was being used in England at that time. So it's one of the very few authentic medieval buildings in what's now the United States, even though officially the Middle Ages ended a century earlier, around 1500. Okay, so it's Gothic. That's part of the meaning. Remember, is always what style is. So where are the Gothic features? We already defined those. Well, here you're pointed arched, right? Windows. Now the door isn't. Okay, so that's an exception. Some historians believe the door was changed decades later, and that makes sense because there's some evidence that the door was originally pointed. But even so, all of the windows have pointed arches. Then you have a tall tower with, some of you may laugh at this, a tapering spire. It doesn't taper much, and then ends with that finial. Remember that word I said could be useful if this happens. I'm not saying it will be, but to be not cut from the study list at the moment. We'll decide that later. Assume it might still be on the test. Well, that's a spire. It reaches a point. It may be only 6 feet or 8 feet above the top of the tower, but it's a tower with a tapering spire. And then it has a rose window. Let's see, I think I have that. Yeah, there it is. Very small, but a round stained glass window set into the back wall. And look how massive that pointed arch window is here. The stained glass is remarkable here, but it's not medieval because they didn't know how to make stained glass in colonial Virginia. They didn't have the skill to do it. So the windows would have been plain glass. These are my own slides, the ones that are obviously older. So let's just go. If it's on the test, this is the view. It's remarkable. It's set also, the church, this is one other fact about the meaning, in the oldest English speaking graveyard in what's now the United States. I would say North America, but probably somewhere in the Caribbean, like Jamaica, there is something older. So just say in what's now the United States or in the US, this is the oldest English speaking graveyard. There are people buried here. I walked around and looked at their grave markers who were alive when Queen Elizabeth was not yet queen. She was still a young, princess. Going back to the mid 1500s, some of the graves there, because of course they would have been in their 80s by the time this church was built. And some of them had come over on the first ship, so they've been there for a while. So this church is really remarkable, the fact that it survived like this. The only changes were the roof had to be replaced, and the stained glass, the glass in the windows, which was originally leaded, with no colors probably, those blew out most of the windows and the roof itself in a hurricane in the late 1800s. Otherwise, the church is exactly like it looked almost 400 years ago. Okay, so that's the whole meaning. I forgot I had that twice. But you see the buttresses. I guess I should add one more fact. The buttresses here are not flying buttresses because the building isn't tall enough or big enough. Therefore, the walls and the roof are not heavy enough to need a flying buttress. Plus, they probably couldn't have done it with the technology they had in the colonies at that time. So it doesn't have the flying buttresses. But inside it has the Gothic groin vaulting on the ceiling. It's done in wood, but if you go inside the original ceiling, the original organ, the original pews, it's remarkable what survived. It's a functioning church to this day. St. Luke's, it's a national, as you could imagine, historic landmark, of course. All right, so that's plenty on the meaning. And now the form analysis. Well, it's completely symmetrical left to right, as almost all these kinds of Gothic churches in England itself, where these people came from, would have been, or anywhere in Europe. And it's pretty obvious it's unbalanced toward the bottom, because not by much, but the walls are wider than the tower, right? As you can see from there. The rhythm, again, should be obvious with the pointed arch windows and the buttresses. And then this stepped, it's called the stepped gable, which is really unusual. That's an influence from the Dutch architecture that these people were inspired by. These are not pilgrims, though, but they must have gone, somebody, whoever designed or built this church had to have been trained somewhere in Holland, where that style of gable is all over, like Amsterdam and all the houses along the canals. It's called a stepped gable. That creates rhythm. So there's lots of rhythm here. Colors are warm almost entirely. Some people might think that the shingles on the roof don't look warm, but it's borderline. If you want to see it as gray, which I could see why you could say that is cool, but everything else is warm reddish brick, and the textures are the real rough texture of brick and roof shingles, rough real textures, of course, and the windows, obviously real smooth texture of glass. It's dynamic on the windows and the gables, right? On the roof line, you could just say the roof, and stable on the buttresses, right, along the walls and the tower. So it's both. For space, it's a one long narrow room, would be the nave, right, the worship area. One long narrow room with about a 25-foot high ceiling and about a 50-foot tall tower. So those are the two real spaces. There's no modeling, just the shadows in the sun. The lines are painted on the stained glass, so you can't really see them. So you could just say in this slide, all you see are the visual lines around the edges of the windows. And the largest mass, it's a close call, but it's the nave, because it's longer than the tower is tall. And there's only two masses, and the second largest would be the tower. Okay, so moving on to the next must know. This one is the Parson, P-A-R-S-E-N, Capen house. Capen is the last name. And Parson means preacher in Old English. C-A-P-E-N, Parson, P-A-R-S-E-N, Capen house. Now, Massachusetts is a mouthful. It's the longest state name in the United States, 13 letters. So I'll spell it, say it slowly and spell it once. Massachusetts, M-A-S-S-A-C-H-U-S-E-T-T-S. So double S, double T. 1683. Well, let's start with the fact that this is a medieval house in America. And again, that should surprise some people, unless you've traveled in New England. There are hundreds of these scattered around, mostly small towns or rural New England, but there's a couple in Boston. I think it's two left over in the actual city of Boston. One was Paul Revere's house, which was over 100 years old when he moved in. So what do we mean by that when we say a medieval house? Well, the Middle Ages was long over. Even in England, they were pretty much past wearing armor into combat and believing in witches. Not in New England, they still killed, as everyone knows, the Salem witch trials was after this. Well, I don't know if you know, 1692, they were still trying young women for being witches in New England. But in England proper, the Middle Ages, completely that whole philosophy and state of mind, of medieval mindset, they call it, was pretty much over by that time. So why is that still hanging on here in New England? Because these people had come from small towns in England where they still were building their homes and churches, like, the church I showed you in Virginia. But here, this is a medieval salt box house. That's the right phrase. I'll say that slowly. It's a term you would not probably ever hear anywhere else but this class. Medieval salt box, one word, house. It's a style of wooden homes that were used for centuries, all through the Middle Ages and well into the 1600s in England. They were still building houses like this in some parts of rural England until around 1700. So in New England, there are hundreds of them from the 1600s. They're the first century of English-speaking colonies. The 17th century, of course, the 1600s. So that's one fact about it. But what makes it a medieval salt box? Well, it's the three features that mark it as a medieval style house. The word salt box, you don't have to know this, but you could, if you're curious, why that word? Because it supposedly looks like a box where you'd store salt, sugar, wheat, flour, dry goods in your kitchen in a medieval house in England. That's where the word came from. But that's not something you need to write down. But this you would if it is on the final. The three features that make it a medieval house, specifically in medieval salt box, are these three things. First, a high peak gable. Steeply pitched, if you want to say, but most historians say high peaked, reaches a point, a very steep point, just like all the houses in medieval Europe, not just in England, but all over Western Europe, all the wooden ones. The second feature, the one that's most distinct about it, is the overhang. That's a feature that some of you may know the reason for, because in England or other big towns and big cities in medieval Europe, not just England, this was an essential feature. The overhang, the second story projecting out about 2 feet over the first. Can anybody guess why? I'll give you a clue why that was so necessary in the towns and cities of medieval Europe.
Chamber pots.
Somebody go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Chamber pots. These just toss chamber.
Yeah, you got it. The chamber pots. Yeah, in other words, their refuse, and that included garbage, and of course, we won't get too TMI. Yes, they're chamber pots, and they didn't have indoor plumbing, so they would toss them out the second floor windows and yell if they were kind enough to the passersby, look out below. Usually they did, because people didn't want to be a victim of that when they walked down the street in front of someone else's house. So people usually gave you a warning, and then you could duck underneath the overhang, quite literally. So, but here in rural New England, it's totally out in the countryside. I've seen this house. It's just bad pun, I know, but this hangover on this house is I said it wrong. I already blew it. Yeah, overhang. I'm sorry. The overhang on this house is a hangover from their original, not the kind you get from drinking, but a leftover vestige of their medieval heritage. And where these people came from, this was what they knew. So they built the house the same way. So once again, the first two features, I didn't finish with the third one, the high peak gable or steeply pitched roof, second story overhang, and a massive central brick chimney. That's the only way to describe it. A massive central brick chimney. That's another feature that medieval homes all over Europe had. Because what was the room like? Well, now, one last fact about the meeting. This is a house where one of the judges who served on the Salem witch trials lived. And I believe I said this. I think I did. No, it was in a 2.1 class. Obviously, you haven't seen this slide till tonight. There's a play, I think it's in Sonoma County Theater Group, isn't it? I think it's up there somewhere in the North Bay. Maybe it's Petaluma. Being performed right now. It's getting good reviews in the Chronicle, the San Francisco Chronicle, of the local theater company, whatever it's called, up in the Sonoma County area where most of you are. The Crucible. I hope you've heard of it. It's one of the most famous plays ever written. It was written in the 1950s by Arthur Miller, and he won the Pulitzer Prize for it. It's been produced into movies. In fact, Winona Ryder and anyway, there's a bunch of famous people have starred in film versions of what really did happen. It did happen the way that play and the movie.
What?
The Salem witch trials. I think you've all heard of them, right? Where 20 innocent women were hung for no other reason than that they were being accused of being witches by a very vindictive teenage girl in that town. And tragically, they had no chance. Once they were accused, they're basically guilty. That was the end of the Middle Ages, medieval culture in New England. That broke the back of the theocracy. You know what a theocracy is, right? Where the religion runs everything. Some parts of the world, that's happening again. So it was called the Salem witch trials, and the judge that lived here, he was both a minister and a judge. Quite often, people were both the most educated people in each town, and so he served on at least one of the trial. There were more than one trial. They killed 20 people before they finally realized we might have overdone it, and stopped trying people, and it was too late to save those 20 young women. Yeah, it was called the Salem witch trials, and the movie is called The Crucible. The play, and Daniel Day-Lewis, there we go. one of the greatest actors of the last two generations, plays the only male victim. There was one man out of the 20, so 5% out of that's 1 out of 20 was a man. The other were young women that were executed, and that's the true story of what happened. There's a film of it with Winona Ryder, who is a Petaluma native, as you may not know. She's born and raised in Petaluma, is the female lead in that movie version of what happened. And you'll see the houses look just like this in that movie. Those are all sets they made for the film. But this is the real thing. All right. And it's a museum open to the public. Last fact about it. Let's do a formal analysis, do it quickly, so we'll pick up the pace. It's completely symmetrical, left to right. And it depends on how you decide to, but to me, it's balanced top to bottom. If you draw the line right down the middle of the second story, there's about an equal mass above and below, roughly, I would say both ways. And the chimney's dead center in the middle. It always would be. Central massive brick chimney, right? Then we have the rhythm of the windows and of the wood siding, right? You could say boarding if you prefer, but siding is what carpenters would call it. And then these decorative, these are not finials, they're the opposite. You don't have to know the word. Pendant is what they're called. Anything that hangs down and it's purely decorative, whether it's on a clock or a house or a church, is a pendant. So they just say these wooden decorations create rhythm. And obviously there's repeated, shapes of the wooden boarding or siding. And then the chimney, the brickwork is decorative somewhat. It's functional mostly, but it has some decorative detailing. So that creates rhythm. It is dynamic on the third level, which is an attic, but it's a functioning. They would often rent rooms out in the attic for extra income, these colonial families. So that's dynamic, but everything else is stable. It's completely rectangular. And then we have the textures of the real rough texture of wood, real smooth texture of glass, and real rough texture of brick in the chimney. For space, there's 4 rooms, 2 on each floor. So it's 2 large rooms on each floor, right? People shared beds. That's just the way it was. Children sometimes slept with their parents, or all the children in one bed and the parents in another. And those 4 rooms, 2 on each floor, had low ceilings. The ceiling and heights, in fact, every one of these, I've been in about a dozen of this kind of house, never more than about 7 feet, usually less. So low ceilings, 7 feet or less in height, because people were short. They were under 6 feet. Very few people were 6 feet then. Okay, and then we have, let's see, the modeling is the shadows here. Of course, this creates strong modeling, the overhang where the shadows are. And the lines are not carved. Well, they're carved on the chimney. Yeah, that's it. Otherwise, all the lines are visual at the corners. And if you had to break it down by mass, that's a close call, but I would say the second story, if you see it that way, because that's a good 2 feet wider, obviously. And then the first floor, and then the attic, of course, in that order. The color's warm on everything. Warm brown, woodwork, and warm red brick. Okay, this is the next must know. And it's called Moses Well. Moses Well. 2 words, just like it sounds. Moses is a figure in the Bible. We'll define who he is in a minute. It's the art. We actually know the artist is a sculptor named Sluter. Last name is Sluter, 1406. So this is a life-size set of figures from the Bible, and the only one you have to remember in case it's on the exam is the one that's looking straight at us. Or is he? No, he's blind. It's Moses who led the Jews out of, right, according to the Bible. Actually, there's evidence for that, but whatever. Anyway, according to the Bible, this was inspired, this whole decorative well, right, was inspired by different figures, holy figures from the Bible. The most important of whom would be Moses, because he's carrying, you see in his hand, the 10 Commandments that are supposed to tell you how, right, hang on, let's see, do we have to let someone in? Okay, good timing. Yeah, we're just getting to one of the main must-knows here. Let me hide this. Which is the Moses well. Okay, so Moses was the figure in the middle here who's blind at the time that this portrays. Is at the end of his life. Supposedly for 40 years, he and the Jewish former slaves that were, freed by him, walk around in the desert looking for a place. So you could just summarize it this way. This depicts Moses at the end of his life after he had led the Jews to Israel, the homeland of Israel. And of course, now there's a modern country called Israel, obviously, but this would be in the ancient times. So he is shown as a blind man carrying the 10 Commandments, and he is looking in his thinking, not looking, I meant to say thinking, imagining what the promised land, that's what they called it in the Bible, meaning the homeland for the Jews, which would then be the ancient kingdom of Israel, which they founded thousands of years before it became Palestinian territory. And then the Romans kicked them out. Remember, we talked about that before the midterm. So he's happy that he's led his people to their quote homeland, unquote. And he went blind doing it. But he's got horns. What the heck? Sorry, I meant to say, yeah, you see, look here where the curse is at the corner. How can a holy man or holy person of any kind have horns? That's a sign of a demon because of a translation error. That's the only explanation. When the Bible was translated from Hebrew into Latin, whoever did the original translation thought that the Bible's description of Moses, which said he had rays of light supposedly coming out of his forehead 24 hours a day, I guess. That's a weird thought right there. But anyway, supposedly the Bible says he had these rays of divine light after God made him, the one to lead the people out of Egypt. So supposedly he had these rays of light. Now it somehow ended up becoming horns. Or horns of light, and then that was short. So just keep it simple. Say there was a mistake in translation from the original language of the Bible into, well, Latin, when it was for most of the Middle Ages. So by the Middle Ages, Moses is described incorrectly in all the Bibles from then on until the 1700s. For centuries, he was described as having horns. So the sculptures, paintings, statues of him always show him as having horns until someone figured out that mistake. It's kind of comically ironic. And then these are angels, of course, from heaven looking down. Why they're worried, I'm not sure. Maybe because it's the Middle Ages and people were dying of the Black Plague when this was going. Now, why is this well holy? It's considered holy because supposedly the water had holy powers to restore your health. People would come here from all over Europe to pray and bathe in the waters or drink it. And that supposedly could cure you, a magic cure, right? So that's
What waters?
It's mineral water, probably smelled like sulfur,
Um,
eggs. Yeah, I've never been here, but I've been to other places in Europe where they have these, so-called magical, waters. They call them holy waters. So it's, it's
I
a
think
belief.
it's just because of the minerals.
Yeah, and perhaps some people's skin conditions actually could have been cured.
Yeah, can improve with that.
Yeah, sure, it could have been. And of course, and they bottled the water, the Catholic Church did, and sold it, of course, to people who couldn't make the trip or want to take it home with them. I mean, I don't want to get, hey, I was raised Catholic, so I can make these silly comments. Yeah, anyway, the point is, people believed it, some people, and so they made a pilgrimage here. That's why it's considered a holy site or shrine. And if you're curious, the other people are the early kings of Israel that followed Moses. I'm not sure which one. This is probably Saul or David, one of the first kings of Israel. That's in the Bible. All right. And then the last fact is really the most important fact, because here's our last definition for this semester. International style. Just like it sounds, 2 words, international style. The international style, I'll define it for you, and it's repeat it slowly. Has 3 features. It's a style of late medieval painting and sculpture, so it's both. More often in painting, but could be both. This is obviously sculpture, so it fits this too. It's a style of late medieval painting and sculpture. Sorry, it's a long definition, but it's the last one you'll have to know, which had 3 features. Gold backgrounds. Number 1, gold, just like it says, 2 words, backgrounds in each work of art, right? Number 2, a depiction of holy figures, usually from the Bible. Well, that we just covered that, obviously these are. And then the 3rd feature only applies to painting. So number 3, in paintings only, the 3rd feature would be an unrealistic depiction of depth. An unrealistic depiction of depth, or you could say space. You'll see that with the 2 paintings of the style of the international style that we'll see. The last 2 must-know slides will be paintings before we take our break. So this is international style because it's sculpture. Of course, it's three-dimensional by definition. So there's no issue with the depth here because we look at a full three, dimensional figure of an adult man, i.e. Moses standing here, and then a couple of kings of Israel on either side of him. And the angels also are three-dimensional. So this doesn't have the third feature because only paintings in that study, but it definitely has the gold background. That's gold. That's gold. Their wings, in fact, the angels are covered in gold. Gold paint, usually. Sometimes they actually hammered gold on. That's called gilt, but usually just paint. And that would be true of his robes too, because it's faded, but that was originally a gold paint on his robes. The blue is the sign of royalty. So, of course, he's considered like a king of Soda. Well, he was the first king of Israel. I think he died a week after they got to Israel. According to the Bible, he died shortly after they got there. But anyway, so the blue robes would be signs of royalty. That's not about the international style, but the gold colors on the robes of both these two figures, you can't really see the others. This is part of the style that marks this as an international style or late medieval work of art. And of course, these are holy figures. So that's the whole meaning. Formal analysis, balanced. I mean, this guy's leaning over, so his head's a little lower than Moses's and David. We'll say it's David, probably one of the first two kings of Israel. So they're roughly the same height. Technically speaking, you could say, well, let's say the masses are the well itself. That's this whole structure that they're, standing on or in front of. Attached, they're actually attached. Of course, you can say they're attached to the well. The well is the largest mass. And then it's a close call, but probably the king, we'll say King David, the Israeli king to the right, and then Moses would be the third largest. There is the rhythm of the folds in their robes, their eyes and ears, and in his case, the two horns and the beard. Anybody notice something similar? But I can't. Don't write this. Anybody seen The Wizard of Oz, the old 1939 movie? If you have, you may remember the Cowardly Lion, the actor who played him and said he was afraid of ghosts, right? This guy looks exactly like the actor who played that role. Several of my students over the years have mentioned that, so I can never get that out of my head. But anyway, that creates rhythm, the weird divided beard like that, and the incorrect use of horns. So lots of rhythm here, of course, arms, hands, legs, and the angels with their wings. And so there's lots of rhythm, and it is mostly stable. Look carefully. The figures are standing upright, and the well itself is definitely right angles. The walls, everything is stable. But the angels, their wings are dynamic, and the tops of their bodies. And this one, we don't know who he is, probably another king of Israel. To the figure to the left of Moses is leaning forward, but the two main figures in the photo are standing upright, so it's mostly stable. And then we have only shadows from the sun that creates a modeling. All the line is carved on their faces, their robes, their hair. I already mentioned the colors are, well, I didn't say they were warm, but obviously gold or faded gold, yellowish gold is obviously warm. And that's all the way up to the angels up above them. But there is the cool blue and the cool gray or metallic. It's just metal. The well itself is made of metal. And then the textures are the real smooth texture of the well itself, the metal. And then all the rest are simulated textures of hair, beards, right, robes, even wings on the angels. So lots of simulated texture. And that's all done with a carved line. There's no painted line. Okay. I already mentioned really. Yeah. Okay. Now I'm going to cut one of these. Let's see. What time is it? We're doing well on time. So maybe I don't need to cut until we do the review. So we'll go ahead and include this. This is the next must know. It's virgin and child enthroned. Virgin, as the word virgin, which would mean Mary, mother of Jesus, and child, that is Jesus on her lap. Enthroned, ENTHRONED, virgin and child enthroned. The artist, the painter's name is Cimabue. Cimabue. This is an international style painting. It fits that definition. You see the gold background everywhere behind the figures. It's all gold, even below the throne. She supposedly, in other words, this is seen supposedly in heaven, where Mary, after she dies, goes back up to heaven and becomes the queen. They called her in the Bible. I believe it is. The Bible says she's the queen of heaven. So she's sitting on her throne, according to this painting, and every other painting of her in the Middle Ages showed her like this after she's died, if it's not during her lifetime. She's up in heaven, sitting on the throne of heaven with baby Jesus on her lap. And these are angels, if that's not obvious from their wings, right? So all of the background behind all the figures, and these are Jewish prophets from the Old Testament of the Bible. All the background is gold. And then we have holy figures. Well, all of them are. Obviously, they all have something to do with the Bible. We've got the Virgin Mary, mother of Jesus, Jesus himself, the angels, and the Jewish prophets, all of whom are mentioned in the Bible. So the holy figures from the Bible are there, and the unrealistic depiction of space should be obvious. This looks to some people like foreshortening, but look carefully, maybe just at the very bottom, I meant the corners at the very bottom of her throne. But overall, the only technique for space is overlapping, because there's no diminishing size here. These angels are 5 rows of them, right? Further back, that each further is behind, they should be getting smaller and smaller, much noticeably smaller as their heads and their shoulders, but that isn't the case. And there is almost, or just say very little foreshortening, if any, only at the bottom of the throne. And then the only other technique is overlapping, which is, goes back to the prehistoric cave painting. So that's nothing very developed or sophisticated. So the only real technique, most of these kind of paintings, the international style paintings like this one, used was overlapping. So it has that unrealistic depiction of depth or space. Okay. And then the final thing about this is probably that the skin colors have that greenish look that we've been talking about. I think I did with the icon, yeah, right before, well, no, it was right after the midterm, right? A painting of similar kind of painting, only not international style, early medieval, where all the skin tones on all the humans, and for that matter, the angels, the holy figures, it all look like dead flesh. At least that's how I describe it. Greenish gray color, which isn't the color that any human being's skin, at least if they're alive and healthy. So they look like either dead flesh or very ill skin tones, and that's not deliberate. It's some kind of chemical impurity. So it's the last fact about the meaning, is that at this point in time there was no oil painting. Oil painting preserves its natural colors, or just say its original colors. Oil painting is a Renaissance invention. This is well before the Renaissance. So they had a different kind of paint. You have to know, but some of you probably who've taken painting classes know it's egg-based paint, tempera it's called. Which can discolor over the decades, over the centuries. But it could be the paint already, originally, when it first was made, this painting could already have the discoloration on the skin tones because of chemical impurities. We don't know if it's the aging or the original chemicals in the paint, but either way, it causes this deadly, dead flesh looking color. Okay, plenty on the meaning. Formal analysis, well, I already said for space, I already covered that, just overlapping. The largest mass, well, it's a close call, maybe the throne, but I think it's Mary by a notch, because you only see part of the throne. So either, however you see it, maybe the throne is first, then her. And then it's a close call, because these 2 angels, you can see the whole length of their bodies. But Jesus is a pretty good sized toddler, not a baby here, right? And actually, this guy was one of the better painters of that period, of the late medieval or international style. Many of them painted very unrealistic looking faces on Jesus. This at least looks like a real human, toddler here, right? With a normal expression, and even the mother looks more natural than many of these medieval paintings. But you'll have to add that fact. If you just notice that. Well, let's call him the 3rd largest mass then, and that's all of that elements. Then we have the modeling that they could do well, even in this late medieval period of painting, on the robes. And even though the skin color isn't realistic, the modeling around their faces is, right? And then we have the rhythm of the halos. These are halos around the angels with their wings, the folds of their robes, the heads of each one of these holy figures. Lots of rhythm. It is almost entirely stable. The only things dynamic are the heads. All human heads would be, of course, the top of their heads, and then the bottom of the throne. Everything else is upright and stable, and it's completely symmetrical, completely balanced. If you do the line, just depending on where, but here there'd be an equal amount of space above and below. Of course, I already mentioned the rhythm. Let's see, line is thin outline, and the silhouette textures are excellent. they're very realistic on the hair, the skin, and the robes, even if the skin tones aren't. Lastly, we have the color. It's cool blue on Mary's robes and some of the angels' robes, warm on Jesus's clothing, warm on the gold background, and then unfortunately cool on the greenish gray skin tones, which of course not supposed to be in real life. All right, so we've got two more must-knows. We're doing very well. Now, I took this off the list to say, see what I mean about, look, this doesn't look very good. Well, sort of, like, I guess, but it's not very well done. It's by a less talented another Italian from maybe a generation later than Chuma the international stuff. It's not on the list. You don't have to, but I'm just showing there's the green skin color we've been talking about. It's really noticeable in this one. Okay, so let's get it to our next must know. And then we have one really important. I haven't said on any of these slides tonight. Did you notice that? This is so important. I'm not cutting it from the study list. That will be this one, the last slide, and there'll be a lot to say about it. And then we'll take our break a little bit early. But we still have two more must knows that you do need to take notes. So here's our second from the last slide for this semester, actually, not just tonight. It's February, it's February. I always pronounce it February, but that's not how it's spelled. From Book of Hours, plural. February, of course, is the month. February. February from book. If you want to say the book, that's how I'd write it. But in Stockstead, it's just February from Book of Hours. That's another phrase for a calendar. It's a very fancy, decorated, or illustrated is a better word, a very fancy illustrated calendar. That's what Book of Hours meant. The artists were two brothers, Limburg brothers, Limbourg, Limburg brothers, 1416. Yeah, if you're curious, there is such a cheese from France, and it's spelled the same way. Probably has nothing to do with these two brothers. So these two guys were hired to paint an illustrated calendar for a wealthy landowner. And that's what each scene depicts, a different month of the year on his estate. This is the month of February, which of course is a winter scene. So here's one of the facts that makes this rather remarkable. There were lots of these kind of calendars painted, thousands of them. But why are we looking at this one? Because it's one of the more unusual ones for two reasons. One is that it shows the first winter landscape. So each of the winter months on this calendar showed the first winter landscapes, plural, painted in European history since the fall of Rome. For 1,000 years, no one seemed to want to paint winter landscapes. I guess they were too cold and busy, and their hands froze too much to paint winter landscapes, even from memory. So I'll say it again. This is one of the first, or let's just say it's the first known winter landscape in European art since the fall of Rome for over 1,000 years. It's pretty surprising. And of course, it depicts, if it's not obvious, what scene is depicting peasants who were slaves. There's no other word. They were slaves, literally, in every sense of the word. They were legally owned by their master, who was the owner of the estate. They were called serfs, and that's not the kind that you use a board in the water on. It's with an E, S-E-R-F-S. I think I use that word, yeah, with the stained glass windows at Notre Dame. So these are serfs or peasants who were slaves for their landowner. That their whole lives they were tied to the land and required to work and didn't make any profit from they just got room and board, food, and a place to stay. So they're taking a break, if it's not obvious here in the middle of a winter day. These three women are warming themselves up in a barn. They were probably out working on the sheep and shearing sheep in the sheep pen. They couldn't be getting honey because it's winter. So their honey beehives, I'd say, would be for the warmer ones. And then here's a kiln where they would make all kinds of pottery when they were needed. And then here's a woman coming back from somewhere in the fields, shivering, of course, as she crosses the courtyard to join the other women. Now up here are two men working. One is chopping trees. And here's where it gets really ridiculous. This man, well, let's go back up close, is almost as tall as the trees he's chopping down. I mean, it's silly. It's ridiculous. Of course, what does that tell us? This is an unrealistic depiction of depth. So it's also an international style painting. For instance, one of the three features we'll focus on first is the unrealistic depiction of depth. Here's a man leading a donkey with something, we don't know what, some product he's going to sell in town, or maybe he's going to go buy something and bring it back, some kind of food or something for the other peasants. And look how big he is in proportion to the town he's heading. If he stay, at this rate, the way he's shown how tall he is, when he gets to the town, he'd be taller than the church steeple. He'd be like Godzilla invading this village. It's ludicrously bad because they had no skills in Northern Europe when this was painted. Most painters, or almost all painters, were unable to depict realistic depth. And that means they didn't know scientific perspective at all. The Italians already were using it for decades before this. Of course, they didn't have that, but they also didn't know how to do diminishing size. So all they had was overlapping. And in this case, there is some foreshortening on the roof of the sheep pen. And you could say just part of the barn roof. Those two things have foreshortening. Everything else as well, some people would say the fence does. But all the other objects are just overlapping. The people overlap the background. And then these two giants who are way bigger than they ought to be are only, completely out of realistic depth here. They're just way too big. So all they have for space, depicting space, those two figures against the landscape is overlapping. Now the gold background is all over this place, the whole upper half or so. Well, maybe it's, a third. That's all gold paint. And this is the sign for, right, Aquarius. That's all gold. And this is gold, the sun crossing the sky. So where are the holy figures? They're right here. These are Greek mythological figures. And this is Apollo. According to the Greeks, they believed that he brought the sun on the back of his chariot across the sky every day, starting with the sunrise and and then disappearing over the horizon at sunset. And for whatever reason, enough people in Europe, and even Catholic countries like France, still believed in some parts of the ancient Greek myths. And remember, the Romans also had the same exact myths. So these are holy figures. They're just from an earlier religion. They don't necessarily have to be from the Bible. So it's got all three features that we just gave you for what marks this as an example of the international style. Okay, formal analysis is pretty easy. I said the only techniques I already covered space. Oh yeah, some of you might think, if you look at this, I don't at all think that's atmospheric perspective. Not really. That's the color of the brick or stonework, I should say, on these stone houses and church. There's no overlapping, big kind of a hazy look of the entire horizon, the blue hazy look. So it doesn't have that. They didn't know how to do that. Atmospheric perspective had been lost since the fall of Rome. The Romans did it, and then the medieval artists lost that skill until the Italian Renaissance rediscovered it. So it does not have atmospheric or scientific perspective, only overlapping and some limited foreshortening in the foreground. But it's nicely done with the texture. That's really superb here with the clothing on the women. Dresses, the fence here, the barn roof, right, or ceiling here with all the beams, the beam ceiling, the brick on the kiln, and even the trees are fairly well done. Winter trees would have no leaves. Oh, there we go. So, and obviously it has powerful rhythm on the repeated shapes of the beehives, the fencing right down here around the barnyard, the beaming on the ceiling, and of course all the human figures with their arms, hands, legs, heads, feet, lots of rhythm. It is both stable and dynamic. I used to say it was more stable than dynamic because of the upright objects here, and here, the barn, the kiln, all that. But the fence curves, there's a diagonal aspect to the foreshortened roof of the, and then of course some of the beaming is diagonal. And even though the trees here are stable, I'd say it's more stable than dynamic, but there's plenty of dynamic detail. This woman's leaning over here, she's leaning back, and the sheep are, so it's both. And all of the lines are thin. The modeling is realistic, strong modeling that you'd see, midday sun shadows created by the sun. That's realistic everywhere on the structures, the trees, and the human figures. Let's see, the largest mass, it's actually the landscape, if you count that as a single mass, then the barn, then the kiln, and then I guess a close call, maybe the fence at the front of the barnyard. Let's see, am I forgetting anything? Color, cool on the landscape, and almost all the human figures have blue or gray color clothing, don't they? Or in this case, white with a slightly warm red dress. And then the barn itself, and some of the details like the beehives and the sheep, I would say, are, yeah, light yellow. So there's warm detail, but more cool than warm. Okay, we're doing well on time. Let's see. Oh yeah, up here you could say there's a combination of cool and warm on the blue sky and the gold painting on the sun, and crossing across the sky, and this Aquarius, right? The figure from astrology, right? The sign, the zodiac sign. Okay, now this is the most important slide, and I'm going to give you a very strong hint that it has a high possibility of being, if not a probability of being, on the final. So take very good notes. Hang on, let me just limber my throat here. All right, this is the last must know for this semester. And it is the lamentation, 2 words, the lamentation, LAMENTATION. To means the word lamentation means to mourn, lament the death of someone. LAMENTATION, the lamentation. The artist's name is Giotto, or if you're from Indiana, like my favorite aunt, Giotto, she'd call him GIOTTO. And the date is 1306. This is a mind-boggling painting. No one can explain how this guy created this painting 100 more, just say a century, just keep it so. Roughly a century before the Renaissance even began, Giotto was using techniques that hadn't even been invented yet, and no one can explain that. He claims he was divinely inspired, by, in other words, God or heaven. Maybe we just have to explain what makes this painting, literally the way to write it, is a century ahead of its time. A whole bunch of things. Let's start out with the skin tones. You notice? How did he figure out, when oil painting hadn't been invented yet, how to make the skin tones look like natural, European, of course, skin tones, and not have them fade and turn dark green or deadly looking? Nobody knows. He must have figured out some chemical composition for his paints. There were no oil paints. So that's one thing that marks it as super realistic and much more ahead of its, or advanced and ahead of its time. Another is the display of emotions in the people. These are mourners. There are a couple or 3 here of his disciples, right? And that's, if it's not obvious, Jesus's dead body and his mother Mary kissing him goodbye with her blue robes. That's part of the meaning. Remember, always Mary is shown with blue robes. So let's finish this up. Okay, so what we have here is all the mourners with actual natural emotions, and even in the sky here, we see the angels, right, circling above and with paroxysms of grief here. Then we have the landscape. My God, he got the landscape correct. He got all of the landscape correct here. And that is the cliffs in the background. He never been to Israel. This, of course, is Israel, obviously. It's where Jesus lived and died. No one knows how he got that valley. It's still, I've been there. That valley is called the Valley of the Kings, where the early kings of Israel, their bodies are long gone, but their tombs are still there. Nobody knows how he never went there, or know what his family did. So he either had a vision, or he just, guessed what the landscape looked like. And then the most remarkable thing of all is the depiction of depth. He's got diminishing size on the angels in the sky. He's got overlapping with the figures here, right? And diminishing size on the heads of these mourners in the background. Obviously, atmospheric perspective. If it isn't obvious, you got to write that. That's clearly the blue hazy look at the back end of the valley. Nobody else was doing this. And finally, he had his own, most remarkable fact of all, his own freehand approximation of scientific perspective. And no one knows how he could have done that, because it didn't exist. And there's no diagonal lines. There's no vanishing point. It's been x-rayed to death. This painting is world famous. It's in a church in Italy. You can just say it's a fresco on the wall I should probably start with that. It's a fresco on the wall of the church. And of course, it depicts the death of Jesus. That's obvious. So you probably don't need to write that. A scene from the Bible. But how he got this depth and depiction of depth, I mean, with no scientific perspective technique at all available to him. He figured it out somehow, just intellectually. He was a genius, obviously. He was the most talented painter in Europe. No question of that fact. And this painting proves that. So I'm going to wrap this up because I'm going to need to get some extra storage space. I'm going to do that now just to make sure during the break that we don't have an issue with that, like I did last week, even though I delete more and more videos every week. Okay, wrapping it up. Is there rhythm? Oh, wow, everywhere. You've got the mourners' heads and hands, their robes, arms and legs, of course, of Jesus's body, the angels in the sky with their wings and halos, plenty of rhythm. It's both stable and dynamic. It's dynamic on the cliff behind them, or the cliffs. There's two sides to the canyon, of course. And their heads, their arms, hands, feet, and the angels in the sky. Those are almost all dynamic. There are stable elements, though. These two mourners, by the way, we probably know that this is Peter and that's probably Matthew. The first two disciples, almost certainly they're the first two to join Jesus. They're standing to the side. We know this is Peter because Peter's always shown as a gray man with gray hair and a beard. He's the oldest disciple. Okay, and so then obviously some of these mourners are stable as well. Jesus's body is somewhere in between, is mostly stretched out. The lines are both bold, allow Jesus's body all along it. And I would say the mourners in the front row, but then there are thin lines on the further distant mourners and on these two disciples and the angels. The largest mass, you decide. Where do you divide these groups? I mean, if it is one group of people, it's the largest mass. But if you divide each person separately, then it's probably the rock wall behind them. And then these two disciples that you can see standing full length to the far right. And then maybe Jesus's body, even though you don't see the middle of it, it's implied. Then you could say that would be the third largest mass. The colors, obviously alternating cool, right, and warm. And then we have the colors are, again, a mixture. Well, warm on all the halos of the holy figures. Almost all the figures here have halos, except these two mourners and the ones in the background. The angels all have halos, so that's all warm colors. The sky and the landscape behind them, clearly blue, very, of course, cool colors. And then some of the clothing on the other mourners alternating between grays and purples and whites. The similar texture, superb. That's true of almost all these paintings, but his even better on the hair, the skin, the clothing, the rock wall behind them. All of it's super sharp. And then the modeling is strong and realistic as well on each item. And is it balanced? Yes, roughly, I would say left to right, very much so. This group here and this group, they're pretty much equal. And then though this wall is lower in the left half, then you've got the cliff in the background, and then the angels, and and the sky roughly equal, covering the area they covered with the mourners at the bottom, gathered around Jesus' body. So it's roughly balanced, left to right and top to bottom. Okay, I'm going to pause the recording. Stop share, and then we're going to do pause recording. All right. During the break, it took some back and forth because I've never had to do this before. The storage capacity seems to be diminishing on my laptop, maybe because it's an old laptop. I mean, the total I'm talking about, not just for this, because I don't store anything else on here besides, some emails and Word,
So I have a suggestion for that.
Sure.
I usually at least once like a day or so, I usually go into my storage settings and I delete unnecessary files or stuff that gets built
Oh, yeah.
up.
Oh, I've been doing that. But you know what? I think, yeah, obviously you have a very good point. And yeah, I'm definitely aware of that. And I do that. But I do leave the first few lectures from each half of the class on in case something goes wrong when I try to transfer them to YouTube, or as you found out, my YouTube channel was blocked, and I didn't know if it would be blocked for you guys as well as for me to create. You see what I'm saying? So I'm trying to cover my bases and at the same time delete enough to keep the storage down below its capacity. And I know what that limit has been for 2 years of doing it. Thank you for suggesting it. It makes a lot of sense. And yet I'll have to be more aggressive for whatever reason. It's less capable of storing just a handful of videos, which I don't think I've talked longer in the last few weeks than I did before the midterm. Maybe that's it. I don't know. The videos themselves, I mean, the length. So I just went and deleted a bunch, and I was afraid I'd accidentally boot you guys all out of the Zoom meeting to go off of the Zoom meeting during a live session and do the recycle. You have to back out of the, you don't need to hit the details. Anyway, the point is I figured out with my daughter's excellent high-tech help. Very excited. Some of you may have heard that she came home with her first tips from her new job at Pete's Coffee in Berkeley. If you're ever in Berkeley, Solano Avenue, North Berkeley, drop in, say hi. Her name's Elena. Anyway, you don't have to give her a tip. It's voluntary. Anyway, they just divided up the first tips. She's been there for 2 weeks and they didn't do that last week. So she was all excited. If you happen, some of you to hear that before, I figured out how to mute myself with, I've never done that because I had no reason to. Anyway, thank you guys for your patience. The good news is that this is recording and it'll be set on, I think I'll do it Thursday. So you have an extra day to go back and review if you want. Not review, but recap what we're going to talk about. But let's start with the basic facts. I did this at the beginning, but we had several people join us 10, 15 minutes after class started who may not have heard this. The final is an exact same format and length of number of slides, of questions and sections, 3 sections, 5, remember, slide identifications. You definitely need to log on by 6:40 because the first slide will hit the screen at 6:45. I've said that before. You'll get an email as an extra reminder. I've been saying it for a while. The point is that then you get within the first 10 minutes, the first 5 slides, you have 2 minutes on each slide. Most you don't need nearly that long. Then another 10 minutes for true, false answers. And then the rest of the time for the slide essays. So 3 slide essays, 5 slide IDs, that's 8 slides, plus 1 extra credit optional slide worth 5 points at the end. And I will be giving the test in real time, like I did the midterm. I'm not recording it because at this point, it's pretty, unless if there's some kind of an emergency that you know ahead of time, if it's a family emergency, unavoidable, physically requiring you to be out of town, or an illness that you can verify. These are not my rules. This is the JC or the district's, Santa Rosa Junior College District's rules. With some kind of evidence of that, then there might be a way to give you a makeup, but not before I have to submit a grade, unless you happen to get in touch with me well before Monday of next week. And that's only if it's an emergency that is verified in writing. Okay, so that's not really an option for most people. Plus which I would think you just want to get this done and out of your way so you can relax for whatever you're going to do this summer, and your grade will be submitted on time and it'll be the good one that you've earned, not because you had to rush around and couldn't take the final. So it's in real time, but the good news is, like the midterm, you have extra time to work on it. And that would be because you've already seen the slides. You should at least be able to identify the ones even on the slide essay part. If you don't finish those essays, you've got until midnight of the day of the final. It's 1 week from tonight, and it's not being recorded. So same thing for submission. I'm going to go ahead and hold it up like I did before the midterm. It needs to be submitted the right way if you want me to log it in and confirm that I got it and grade it on time with all the others and get the grade and the points you earn into your file, you're on the roster. I mean, so you're turning in the final. Let's see, here we go. Now, obviously you adjust this. It's pretty straightforward. I'm not going to have to do it again, right? You can see what I've done. It's for all 3. I'm teaching 3 different classes, totally different numbered classes this semester. Usually I do 2 of one and 1 of another. So obviously you guys will write, right? Art 1.1 final exam, right? Underline last name, comma, first name. And then it absolutely, for me to be able to open it, needs to be a PDF to markw@aol.com. If you want to back it up by sending it to, of course, you can do the official website, of course, and that would be, of course, Outlook. But I've been having some issues. I'm not just me. I've noticed that many other classes and instructors and students in both this class and others seem to have had some issues with it. They've even the high-tech people, IT, right? IT assistant type people. They're very good. I appreciate it. They're very helpful. They're hands-on. They usually answer the phone, unlike every other college I taught at, except UC Berkeley. They were pretty good too. But some of the other community colleges, you never could get a live person to answer your questions or help you with the problem. But anyway, they've sent emails out saying we've had a few issues with the campus website or with Outlook. So just to be safe, you should send them to me. And if you want to back it up with the same kind of, right, I'll hold it up again so you can have it and maybe take a screenshot. The same exact format and labeled correctly. Please use your full last and first name the same as you registered on your registration for this class, the way it should be already have been with your midterm, right? Because if you have some funny handle and it's not obvious who it is because your email name is different, at least I'll be able to see whose test is whose from the correct labeling of the right actual document of the PDF. By the way, if you don't send it as a PDF, big problem could occur. It's rare, but it has happened where I can't open it and I can't find some other alternative route to open it. If it's a certain kind of document, then perhaps for whatever reason, I have both, of course, a laptop and I call it a mainframe. My daughter keeps saying it's not a mainframe. Whatever, it's a PC. I have two, and I could try to open on both, but sometimes I can't open something that's not a PDF on either. And you take off because, hey, it's the end of the semester, last test, I'm gone, bye. You won't get credit for that test. So don't send it, please, as anything other than a PDF for your own sakes and your peace of mind. Okay, so that's the procedural aspect. Pretty much straightforward, right? What was on the midterm, it's the same process for this. You'll get an email summarizing this one more time before the end of the week by Friday. And the test itself, you are, of course, in need of this. It's up to you to decide. You want to download it, to handwrite it and fill out the answers. A real three-dimensional hand, please print neatly. If you do, I'll remind you that when the test starts. If you're going to do that, then you need to make screenshots again, just like you did with the midterm, and convert that into a PDF of each page, right? Or even easier is to just do some kind of whatever kind of document you want to use, Word doc or whatever. And then that, obviously, one last step is converted into a PDF before you send it to me by midnight of next Monday. Okay, so we've covered the basic procedural stuff. Are there any questions? All right, so let's do the reduction process and take our time. And like I said before the break, because there were some connection issues, and there still could be, to make it more, certain that you'll see what is the actual final list of slides you do need to study and which ones you don't. I will hold up each page, not as we do it, it would be cumbersome and time consuming. But at the end, I'll do that and hold them up to the screen long enough for you to see them, but also maybe take a screenshot if you feel the need to do that, which I've never done before, but because we had some kind of a, glitch or whatever you want to call it with the your internet connections week. And it is, let me double check. Yep. I had taken my laptop into the living room to ask my daughter, and I just reconnected. That would be a problem, although I would have a warning. That's one nice thing about this laptop. I hope everyone's laptop has that function. Warning, your battery is low. Okay, that's not going to happen now because it's plugged in and everything's attached to the proper outlets at the wall here in my bedroom. All right, so let's do this. Remember how we did this? Exactly the same procedures we did with the midterm. We're going to go week by week, slowly, cross off 40% of the total slides. By the time we finish, we may have to go back and add a few more to get to 40%. Then I'll read each week's reduced or removed slides And then I'll hold it up to the screen. That extra step is just for tonight. Hopefully that won't be necessary for my other two classes. But that will take it one step at a time. And before I move on from the end of this process to the same process of reducing the list of terms to know, I will double check that you all have correctly noted which slides to remove. But how do we get to 40%? Some of you, we got to count, of course. Each semester I vary the number of slides by a handful one way or another. So I don't have it memorized. So let's count how many slides there are, and then it's pretty easy to calculate 40% of whatever the total is. Okay, so here we go. I'm counting silently. If you want to count along with me, by all means, please do. We'll just do, I won't keep counting out. Starting with week 8. Let's see. I'm 34 in week 12. Okay. $70. I get exactly 70. Anybody have anything different? It's pretty easy. 40% of 70 is 28. I may be extra, whatever, generous and make it 30, not even 30 to cut off the total list, but that will be the most I've ever cut. But at least 40% is a guarantee that I put in writing. So at least 28 slides. All right, everybody, now follow along, flipping back to roughly the middle of the syllabus for where after the midterm was done, we did under week 8, early Christian and Byzantine art. Okay. We're going to cross off San Vitale. All right, so you're doing this with your pens as we go along together here. Okay. And then icon of Virgin and Child from Istanbul. But that's only 2 out of 7. And it's not 40%. I can't guarantee 40% on each week's topic. That would take too long to calculate subcategorizing, but it should be on average. So I guess as much as I hate to do it, I'll cross out St. Basil's because it's such an interesting building, but we'll cross out that one. The last one under week 8, St. Basil Cathedral, Moscow, cross that out. All right. Week 9, Great Mosque at Isfahan in Iran, cross that out. Next page. Mosque of Sultan Selim from Turkey. I'm going to leave the Blue Mosque at the moment and the Taj Mahal. We'll see. I may have to go back and cut one of those. Moving on to week 10. Going to cut reclining Buddha from Sri Lanka. Okay. Going to cut Descent of the Ganges from India. All right. And then Eternal Shiva from Cave Temple. Yeah, there we go. The third one down. We'll repeat all of these one more time. And then, of course, like I said, you'll have the image of each page held up to the screen before we move on to the terms. Okay, moving on to week 11. Shang Dynasty Fang Ding. I love the name of it. A ring-a-ding-ding. Yeah, okay. We didn't cover it in the course, but it counts to the total of 40%, obviously. So let's see, what else? Oh, Fu Guangxi Pagoda. Now, that doesn't mean the term pagoda might not appear. It might appear on the final. But that slide because there were two different versions, remember, two different types of pagodas from China, and I don't want to confuse you. So that's almost, yeah, it's pretty close to, yeah, I'm going to leave that for now. We'll probably have to cut one or two more before we finish. Okay, but the second half, we definitely need to cut at least two or maybe three. So let's see. Monk sewing, cow ninja, cross that out. And the one above it, night attack at Sanjo Palace. We need to cut, I'd say at least one more. Okay. Because these two temples are similar to each other. I'm going to go ahead and cut Biodo Inn or Phoenix Hall. Partly because it has two names, but also two temples right after each other are very similar. So try to avoid that kind of overlap. Okay, so that's three. Biodo Inn from Phoenix Hall under Japanese art. Night attack at Sanjo Palace and monk sewing. Okay, moving on to week 12. Mayan bloodletting ritual lintel. Okay, fresco of a Mayan high priest from Mexico. And let's do at least one more. Well, I'm going to cut Templo Mayor, not because it's not important, it is, but the slides I have don't show the whole thing. I just didn't find any image. Or when I was there, I tried to take you can't get far enough away from it to do that. It's too hemmed in by the urban setting. It's in the middle of Mexico City. So because that view would be hard to do an analysis of, we're going to cross Templo Mayor from Mexico City. Okay. Week 13, westward from San Pantaleon. I think we didn't cover it. That's one. And then Stag Staff from Sutton Hoo. We'll cross that off. And that literally is 40%, I think, of the total. Yeah, 2 out of 5. All right, second half, Romanesque art. Prophet Jeremiah from the Church of Saint Pierre. Cross that out. At least one more here. Okay. I'll cross off Nave because we're going to have another Nave that I probably won't cross. Nave of Saint-Étienne at Caen in France. Okay, from week 13. Okay, week 14. We never covered Sainte-Chapelle from Paris. And I promised to cut at least one or more like two cathedrals. So let's see. I'm going to leave Chartres Cathedral. The word nave, though, again, because I may cut any slides, if I do, the only other one with the view of a nave on this week 14 does not mean that that term might not, that definition might not come up on the true false section. So because we have two of Chartres and the facade is more important, let's cross off nave of Chartres Cathedral from France. And then I'll decide which one of the other cathedrals we go back to. So moving on for now to week 15. Let's cut Cologne Cathedral because it is a twin tower church, much in the French Gothic style. And the view is, a little bit farther away, less detail. So leaving Salisbury on there. Okay, that's week 15. Moving on to the ones we covered tonight. We're going to cut the Virgin and Child enthroned. Okay, February from the Book of Hours by the Lindbergh brothers. And as much as I hate to do it, because I love both these sites and, the history of them, but let's go ahead and cut both of the last two. St. Luke's Church from Virginia and Parson Capen House from Massachusetts. So we're probably close to 40%, but the only way to know is if we get at least 28 that we cut. So let's go all the way back, right, to week 8. And count up how many we have. And then I'll repeat the whole list. It's 27. We need to cut at least one more. Right? Everybody has a different number. Speak up, but that's what I have. So we at least need to cut one more. Let's pick one where we didn't cut more than two already. Let's see. Oh, Song Dynasty Guanware Vase, week 11. Okay, week 11 under Chinese art. Song Dynasty Guanware Vase. Okay, I'm trying to decide if I might just go ahead and add two more to give it a nice round. Well, I did say I'd cut more than one cathedral, so I'm going to give you a break on that. Okay, everybody's switch or flip to week 14. Well, I'll cut Reims because Notre Dame is so important. I wouldn't cut that. Reims Cathedral in France, and I hate odd numbers. That leaves with 29, so let's cut one more. So I'm going to leave Chartres and Notre Dame. 2 is, I think, reasonable, right? And what else are we going to cut? Need to at least have one international style slide. So okay, let's do week 13. Cross page from Lindisfarne Gospel under week 13. England 700. That is 30. It's the most I've ever cut. That's over 40%. That leaves you with 40 slides, of which exactly 20%. 1 out of the 5, 8 of those will be on the final. Okay, let's do the list one more time, slowly week by week to make sure you all have the same exact information. And then I'll hold the pages up to the screen and we'll do the same for the list of terms. Hang on. My throat begins to give out at the end of my second 3-hour Zoom lecture, but I'll be fine through the end of this process. Okay, everybody got your pens just to check. I don't think any of you should have missed this, but just to make sure you didn't overlook any of the ones you're supposed to cut. Let's do them all slowly together one more time. Week 8, cut 3. San Vitale from Ravenna. Icon of Virgin and Child from Istanbul. St. Basil's Cathedral from Moscow, okay? Week 9, we're going to cut 2. Great Mosque at Isfahan and the Mosque of Sultan Selim from Turkey. Week 10, Eternal Shiva from Cave Temple, India. 3, a Reclining Buddha from Sri Lanka and Descent of the Ganges from India. All right. Week 11, 3 more. Shang Dynasty Fang Deng from China. Fu Guangxi Pagoda from China. And Song Dynasty Guanware Vase, China, of course. And then 3 for Japanese art. Byodo Inn, Phoenix Hall. Night Attack at Sanjo Palace. And Monk Sewing at Cow Ninja. All right. Week 12, we cut 3 more. Mayan Bloodletting Ritual Lintel. Fresco of a Mayan high priest, Mexico, and Templo Mayor, Mexico City. Week 13, 3 more. Stag Staff from Sutton Hoo, England. Cross Page from Lindisfarne Gospel, England. And Westward from Santa Pantaleon, Germany. And then under Romanesque art, 2 more. Nave of Saint-Yen at Cannes. And Prophet Jeremiah from the Church of Saint-Pierre. Week 14, Nave of Chartres Cathedral, France. Reims Cathedral, France, and Sainte-Chapelle, Paris. Week 15. Wow, 5. Cologne Cathedral from Germany. Virgin and Child Enthroned by Cimabue. February from Book of Hours by Limburg Brothers, and St. Luke's Church from Virginia, and last but not least, Parson Cape and House of Massachusetts. I mean, at least if you ever travel to those 2 states that are at the end of the list I just cut, you'll know something about the history of the places you might want to find. By the way, there was a movie with, let's see, what do I say? A whole bunch of famous actresses. I can't remember their names. That's terrible. Anyway, 3 witches living in a town in Massachusetts, and guess what town they used? The town that house is in, Topsfield, for that movie. And it was about 3 witches who decided to get revenge on their Wayward Husbands, I think it is. It's a funny movie. It was made in the 80s and it was filmed there in Topsfield. The whole town is like a museum that has more than one of those medieval houses. One other quick note before I hold this up. It's been in the news for weeks, so I meant to say this while we were still doing the slides or right after we finished the slides of the Dome of the Rock, which you notice I did not cut, so you can figure that's a high possibility of being on the exam. Most of the media coverage of the various disturbances, so many tragic things happen in that area of the world, in Jerusalem, right? The Dome of the Rock got it correct when they showed which building they were, but a lot of them, then they described the entire site as the site of the Dome of the Rock, or they even showed the wrong building. Some of them, maybe 2 or 3, in a newspaper or on TV. There are 2 mosques there, and we only covered the one that you need to know, of course, that's not cut, the Dome of the Rock, the most famous one. But the oldest mosque in the world, it's older than Dome of the Rock, is a few hundred, like maybe 100 yards away on the same site. And both of those are resting on top. I covered this already. So obviously, you don't need to write this. On top of the ruins of the Jewish Temple of Jerusalem, which is the root of a problem, a big one between those 2 religions, and the passionate beliefs that people have in their sacred sites that shouldn't be violated by a different religion. It's an intractable problem as far as I can see. So anyway, a lot of them started, I noticed more than in the past, they call the wrong thing, the Dome of the Rock, regularly in the media. In the last 3 or 4 years, apparently somebody's been educating some reporters on what to write or film when they report from there. So they got that right. The Dome of the Rock, the one we're going to cover, remember, is the 2nd oldest mosque in the world and the 3rd holiest site in Islam. All right, so let's do this. I said I would. I'll hold this up to the screen, and I won't leave it up for a whole minute each one, but like maybe 30 seconds or so. And we'll go back to the first week we cut, of course, which is week 8. And you can see my, I think, fairly neat writing, week 8 and 9, sorry, both. You see the first half. The ones with the lines in black ink crossed out, you don't need to study. You could just forget about those and study all the other ones. Okay, everybody sees that? All right, let's do the next page, one page at a time. I'm trying to hold it as steady as I can and close enough. Yeah, there's no slides at the bottom of this, so right, I can get a little closer here with the next few weeks. The rest of week 9, week 10, week 11. Okay, those are the ones you don't need to study, obviously. All right, next page, week 12 through 14. Well, actually, the ones at the bottom are from week 15. So again, I'll try to hold this close enough. You see the bottom there, just one of those 2, Cologne Cathedral. And then because it's hard to get everything in, let's see, I think I can just do that. There we go. From the top, we have week 12 at 13 and 14. Counting to 30, I figured that's about enough time for hopefully everyone to either get a screenshot or ensure by double checking that they have the correct list. And the last page, the last week, this week 16, you see how many we got? 4. All right. Anybody have any questions? Everybody got that list now correctly? And it looks like we have good attendance. I know one person who said they couldn't be here tonight because of the health issue, but anyone who isn't is going to see this now that my storage capacity has been adjusted. Posted by, I'm going to probably just do it by Thursday, but certainly you'll see it by Friday evening, well before 8 probably, if I wait that long. Okay, so now take out your list of terms to know. And we're going to do the same procedure with this. that we just did. But I'm not going to cut anywhere near 40% because there aren't that many terms, but we'll cut several. Okay, so everybody sees what we're doing. I'll do the same thing by holding this up right before we then call it a night, which we're going to end around 9-ish here. I said we did early, but earlier than even I expected. But any questions you have about anything relating to the class, I will stick around as long as you do, answer them all after we finish this process. Okay, so go all the way back to, remember, ancient Roman art was for the midterm. Okay, so now the terms we're going to need to cover are the ones below triumphal arches, right? So let's do that together. Well, first I need to count to see if I can get, I think 30% is what I usually say, but in that ballpark of the total, because it's a much shorter list than slides. Okay. 26. Anybody have a different number? 26 for the total? Well, so that's a little more difficult to calculate than 70. 40% of 70 is a snap. Might be able to do this in my head, but I don't have a calculator next to me. So let me just do this. A third or 30%, sorry, would be, because 10% would be 2.6. 30% is 3 times that. So what? Let's do that. 8 at least. I might do more. 8 out of the total of 26. I usually leave anywhere from 15 to 18 anyway for people to study, out of which 5 will appear. Remember how this is the way the midterm was saved. There'll be true, false section in which I will state these definitions or part of them, and you have them written down, right? Because at this point, that's all on all the recorded YouTube videos from the previous weeks. If you missed a class, you want to go back and get those definitions. If any part of the statement relating to a definition that isn't cut from our list that we're going to do right now, it isn't accurate, any part is incorrect, the whole thing is false. If all of it is correct, it's true. Okay, so let's go back all the way back to where we're going to start this process, and that is with mosaics. Okay, I'm not going to cut mosaics, but icon I will cut. Icon, okay. 3 main features of Greek Orthodox churches that could appear in some way as a statement on the true false section. We're going to leave that. Things invented by Muslims, I'm going to leave that. But we do need to cut something else. So I'm going to cut apps at the top of that list. We'll probably have to go back and cut 1 or 2 more. Okay, apps. And then on the next page, right after the one with the, because they're not numbered, obviously, universities and things invented by Muslims, we're going to cut Pure Land Buddhism. So we didn't actually cover that. Well, we did, but as a definition, I will not have that on there. Mayan bloodletting ritual, we'll cross that out. Staff, cut that. Next page. Cupola, cross that out. And then let's see. Flamboyant style, cross that out. And let's go back, sorry, to the page before that's on the last page, flamboyant style. I'm going to leave definitely the features of Gothic churches. Any of those lists, you expect that there's a high possibility at least one of such lists will. So I might say, among the 5 main, including what the following features are part of Gothic architecture, or among the five, I'd probably write it that way. Among the five main features of Gothic churches are tall tapering spires, rose windows, and concentric rounded arches. Pretty obvious that's a false statement. It's mixing two styles, Romanesque and Gothic. So those lists are really important for you to have the definition in front of you when you take the test. Okay, let's go ahead and cross off pagoda. I'm pretty sure we have that one on. So let's see. I think that might get us to the 8 that we need. Let's see. 1. And then I'll repeat the whole list and hold it up. 2. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It is. It's 8. So I'll repeat them, the ones we're cutting slowly, and then hold them up. And then we'll be ending a tad before 9. I want to do this slowly and carefully because it is important after all. I mean, it's only 10 points, but that could be one whole letter grade, right? Difference between an A and a B in the class, let alone on the exam. All right, so let's do this one last step, which is going from the 3rd page of your list of terms, cross off icon, next page, cross off apps, and then Hinduism, Buddhism, very likely to be one of those or both of those on the true false section. So, okay, so that's only one on the 2nd page is apps, and the next page there's several. Pagoda, Pure Land Buddhism, Mayan bloodletting ritual, okay, and then staff. And then the last page, 2 more, cupola and flamboyant style. Does anybody need me to repeat any part of that list? And again, I'll hold it up and then I'll just stick around and take questions from anybody that wants to answer anything at all related to the class. Okay, so it's pretty easy. I'm not going to hold these up as long as I did the other list because they're so short. The only one on this page you cut, the first page of the term to know from midterm forward, is icon. Okay. The next page, again, only one term. It's at the top. Apps. Okay.
I'm sorry, could you move closer?
And then 4 actually on the 3rd page. So that's the most of any single page. And I'll hold that up for a little longer. Of course, apps, right? Pure Land Buddhism, Mayan bloodletting ritual, right? And actually that's just over where I'm trying to show this. And then the staff. Yeah, no, you guys helping each other out is really a great thing to see. Actually, I appreciate it. No, so it wouldn't be as easy to do if we weren't on Zoom, obviously. Except at the break, maybe, or at the end of the class. Last page, there's 2 more. Cupola and flamboyant style. Okay, so everybody see, I'm gonna hold it another 10, 15 seconds. All right, does anybody need me to, if you weren't here at the beginning, I just said what the procedure for the test is. That's straightforward. So you should all know how that is going to look and how to, don't forget to look for the actual test by Sunday night. I'll probably do it before that, probably late Saturday, but I do have a walking tour. I'll see a few of you before we do our final meeting of Zoom on Monday at 6:30, 6:40. If you log in by then, you're fine. Don't make it later for the test to begin at 6:45. I hope I'll see a few of you and you can decide as late as midnight Friday if you want to come on the walking tour. But in any case, I don't see most of you until the Monday night exam. I will be checking my email to make sure that I get the late papers that I still don't have from a few people. And any questions you have, or if you need me to confirm the receipt of something or extra credit that isn't related to the walking tour, that you'll get by showing up, of course, in logging, or sorry, I'm at signing in with my assistant who will have a clipboard and a list of classes. You'll see it'll be pretty easy to take just a minute to sign in with my assistant before the tour starts at 2:00 on Sunday, the 22nd. So, all right, now's your chance to ask any questions before we call tonight about anything that we covered tonight about, the class, extra credit, late work. Pretty much covered everything on the exam, I think, and you'll get one more email reminder, and it is your responsibility to print out or download the test by Sunday night or Monday. If you want to wait till the last minute, I wouldn't do that though, for the test. As long as you have it next to you, along with the syllabus and obviously all your notes and the list of terms to know, and any book you want to have. Obviously, it's an open book, open note exam by definition, as are now my in-person ones too. It wouldn't be fair for my in-person. If you take an in-person class from me in the future, and as long as the Zoom classes are still being given in our department or in my class schedule, if you're online or an in-person class from me, I'll give everyone an equal playing field. It's the only fair way. So that makes the test taking a little easier for in-person classes than it ever was before. But don't expect that at a four-year university like UC Berkeley or anywhere else you might take history or art history. They will still probably ask for closed book exams of at least most of the classes, as I understand, are back to in-person. But I want to be fair and have an equal playing field for everybody. So if I see some of you in one of my classes in next semester, I'm not teaching in the summer, but in fall, whether either is in person or online, you'll equally have the opportunity to have your notes and textbooks and your syllabus next to you during the test. All right. I think I've answered all the questions on the test. Any other questions anybody has? I'm going to be looking for those late papers. I hope to get all the remaining ones by the end of this week. All right. Any questions, anybody?
I have a question. Is there a third paper than?
No, there isn't. And you'll get your grade, Jessica. Since I got your papers before the other late papers, I'll grade them first. But I can't guarantee exactly when. So look for that or email me if you haven't seen it by Saturday. You'll probably get your grade for both papers before Saturday or at the latest this week. Yeah, so you're in good shape. Excellent that you got them in on time. All right. Anybody else? Any questions? All right. We'll see you guys next Monday, or a few of you, I hope, on Sunday in Berkeley. Okay. Good night. Take care.